Hello, Raghu, and welcome to the call.
Hello.
And thank you for making the time to be part of the meaningful conversation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah. So, Raghu, we've been knowing each other for quite a while, and we talked about a lot of things. But in this interview, we want to make it like more focused into yourself and how you got here and what made you the way you are. And then how can we put this in a context of the corporate? So that's the just and the essence of the conversation. So let me start with Raghu, the yoga teacher, the OD consultant, the leader, and many, many other things. What would you say what made you today the way you are?
Hmm. Many things, many things. Um, I think, the first thing I can think of when you ask me the question is that I've been extremely fortunate in the kind of teachers I've had,
Hmm.
right? There have been three extremely important people who have mentored me and invested a lot in me. The first is J. Krishnamurti.
Mhm.
So I met him when I was at the worst phase of my life.
Hmm.
And I really think the conversations that I have had with him at that point of time and over the next 10, 12 years when I used to meet him regularly are the fundamental, the foundations of who I am today. Right? And when I look back, I often wonder if I hadn't met him at the time when I did, where would I have been?
Hmm.
Right? So that I think is a very, very critical part of who I am. And then the other teacher is Krishnamacharya, with whom I studied yoga for many, many years. People around the world are more familiar with some of his students, B.K. Iyengar and his son Deshikachar and Patabi Joyce and people like that. I studied with Deshikachar and his father for many years. And that's a very critical part of what has enabled me to develop and grow. And the third is Professor Pulan Garg. The technology of what I work with, I learned from Professor Garg,
Okay.
which is working with small groups, working in encounter groups, working with people intensely, and so on. But the foundations are from my other two teachers. Right? And since I also have a background in technology, I completed my BTech and my MS later from IIT Madras, which is a premier technology institution.
Mhm.
So that has also provided me with a foundation to look at, understand technological organizations and business organizations. So I guess these are my uh, what shaped me in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're definitely very fortunate, Raghu, to have all these come together.
Yes.
But how would you describe your person? Like, if I would ask you, who are you today with
Hmm.
all this impactful and meaningful people that you have met and the way you were shaped today? So who is Raghu today?
See, at one level, I think I'm just a person who is on a journey of self understanding myself. Um, I'm a person who offers whatever I can to people. And, uh, some of the words that are coming to me are very common and trite. So I'm just a seeker.
Hmm.
I'm just on a journey to discover myself and I offer this, right? Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes I call myself a healer.
Hmm.
Yeah. A long time ago, maybe when I didn't know enough about life, if some person asked me this question, I would say I'm an artist of life. It sounds very
Okay.
nice.
Yeah, that
But
sounds really.
soon after I said these very interesting things, my life took a pretty nasty turn
Yes.
and a lot of crash. So
How so?
maybe
How
that's
so,
part
Raghu?
of the art also.
How so? I mean, this is very interesting. I never heard you saying that. How did it crash? I mean, what made it?
Oh, it crashed because see, my dad was in business,
Hmm.
right? And I had just finished college. I was supposed to join him in business. And when I joined him, I discovered that the entire foundation of the business was very, very poor. It was very hollow. So it just had to crash. I mean, we were in tremendous debt, which I didn't know about. And then soon after I joined him, and exactly about a year after I got married and everything was looking good, we discovered that it was not good at all.
Oh, so that's
So
what made you change. You're not the artist in life.
yes. But I think it taught me a hell of a lot. It really taught me a hell of a lot because all my initial work has been in turning around organizations. So I got into this as an engineer, and I didn't know that I was battling through a turnaround situation.
Yeah, yeah.
And whatever I did on the shop floor was not enough. We took a very, very bad tumble. And after that, a couple of people who had seen me working on this invited me to help them turn around their organizations, which I did fairly successfully.
Hmm.
Right. So that is the origin of my work in OD.
Yeah.
And what I discovered when working with turnaround situations is that it's the human being that matters.
Hmm.
Most of the time when I went into these organizations, I was talking to people, understanding what it was all about. And I found that I often met very knowledgeable people in the organization. But something had gone wrong in the way they communicated with each other, something had gone wrong in the way they formed together as teams, something had gone wrong with the leadership. So it impacted people,
Hmm.
right? It impacted their psyche, it impacted their sense of self-worth, and so on. So most of the time, I found that the knowledge that I was bringing in for the turnaround was not all that much more than what they had. What I was really bringing in was a sense of valuing people, sense of making them feel valued in their own selves,
Hmm.
not feel diffident and lacking in self-confidence and so on. So once these factors came in, the way they pooled together and the way they were able to bring in their energies to find a new level of action and productivity was quite fantastic. So that's why I shifted my work more from engineering based work with organizations to purely working with organization development, where methods were part of it, but I fundamentally focused on human beings, what it means to discover yourself, what it means to be the best that you can be, whatever the circumstance might be, and so on.
So this is very interesting, Raghu. I mean, this shift in the organization today and what you have brought to the organization, which made them, impacted the turnover on them. Where did that come from for you? That you had to discover it, or where did you discover it that you have to bring it to the organization?
Like I told you, when I entered my father's organization, it seemed okay on the surface, but inside
Mm.
it was completely broken. So I went into an organization and I had to enter a turnaround situation, right? And but the rot was so deep that while I did a pretty good job of the manufacturing part, which I knew, the sales and the financial end, which my father was handling, were pretty badly off, right? So my entire about 2-3 years or more I spent there turning around the operations, right? So I crashed lead times, I crashed the turnaround times of making a machine. I did some design changes in the machine and so on. Yeah, and I later discovered that many of the methods that I was using were very similar to the Japanese methods of just in time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was basically looking at the entire operation. We were manufacturing printing machines. So I just looked at each machine as a project and worked out a whole process of what is generally called PERT and CPM,
Mm.
right? As though each machine was a project.
Right.
So I went around crashing all the wastes out of the way and things like that. So a machine that was sitting on the shop floor for 34, 35 days before it was made was getting made in less than 10 days. But they couldn't sell it.
Mm. So,
See?
listening to you now is very, very corporate thinking, corporate approach, and very, I would say, corporate leadership approach. But
Hmm.
the other side of Raghu, which is the yoga teacher,
Hmm.
the yoga student, how
Hmm.
much of that contributed on what you hold in your mind regarding the OD and regarding the organization today?
I would say 80% is
Mm.
from there.
And how did it happen? I mean, can you talk more
Yeah.
about this?
How it happened, there are 2-3 influences in this. Our family was, very much into the yogic tradition. Krishnamacharya had taught yoga to my aunts and things like that. So that was part of the family tradition. And, towards the end of college, I was in the college in the 70s. Okay, those were very interesting times,
Mm.
right? That was the time of the Vietnam War and all the Dylan and all these things. So I was very drawn to questioning what is the Western idea of development,
Mm-hmm.
what is the Western idea of progress, and so on. And I also met some other very, very important people. One was a person called Dharampal.
Mm.
Now, Dharampal was a Gandhian,
Okay.
and he had done a lot of study of what was India around the time the British came into India,
Mm.
and followed the whole 100-year period or so, a few years before they came, and a lot of the history of when they came in. And much of the history he has studied is from the records left behind by the British.
Okay.
So he spent many years in England and London looking through the records, and he's rebuilt the idea of India around that time. It's a very, very fascinating study because it gives you an understanding of India which is very, very different from what is taught in the history books today.
Okay.
Right? And there's a lot more of work coming out now which corroborates his stuff, but his stuff was very, very deep. And there were a few thinkers like this who asked the question, now having studied in a premier institution like the Indian Institute of Technology, what are you going to do? Are you going to run behind the tails of the West? Can we make India worthwhile and regain itself and its soul by going to America? So there were a few of us, about 12, 15 of us, who took his word seriously. And I'm very happy for that. Because he then asked us to study some Indian teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He said, there's no point glorifying India, right? If something is not worthwhile, it has to die. But if there is something worthwhile, can you discover what it is? Because unless you discover what is truly Indian, how do you make India grow? You can't make India grow by becoming like the West. You can't lobotomize your brain and become American.
Yeah. And
Right?
where are you from
So,
all this? Like, and the teaching of yoga and understanding and being a student of yoga.
now ask the question again, Arif. I didn't hear
Yeah.
you
And
clearly.
you said 80% have contributed in how you brought your knowledge and wisdom to the organization. And
Yes.
being a student of yoga and studying
Hmm.
yoga from early ages, how did that contributed in having that leadership mindset that you teach today?
See, the basic idea of yoga is not asana and pranayama. Most
Okay.
people, unfortunately, immediately think that yoga is equal to asana and pranayama.
Yes, please. I want you to talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah. So the basic text of yoga is called the Yoga Sutra, which has got 192 couplets, let's say, small lines of
Hmm.
7 to 8 words each. That's it. The commentaries on the Yoga Sutra go for 300, 400 pages, but the Yoga Sutra itself will probably be 20 pages of
Are
these
these the Patanjali Yoga Sutra?
aphorisms. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, just these aphorisms. Now, only about 8 to 10 have anything to do with asana and pranayama.
Okay.
So 180 of these very, very deep reflective statements and aphorisms are about the mind,
Hmm.
how the mind changes, how the mind works, and so on. Now, if you look at the work of most Western psychologists, you'll see that they have dipped into the teachings either of Buddhist or Hindu origin to understand the psyche. For example, Freud is supposed to have studied Lao Tzu and been very influenced by the idea of that Lao Tzu brought in, and the Eid that he talked about, he originally called it the It, which referred to the same thing that Lao Tzu referred to. Carl Jung, everybody knows. He came to India, he studied the Upanishads, he studied the Yoga Sutra, he's talked about chakras. He really understood a lot of the Indian stuff, then restated it for the West, right? And then Gestalt therapy, that's taken from Zen Buddhism, yeah. And then I don't know how many people know this, but a lot of humanist psychology has come from a study of Buddhist or Indian texts.
Okay.
Like Carl Rogers has
Yeah.
spent 6 to 8 years in China studying Chinese Buddhism,
Hmm.
right? And the most important breakthroughs coming through from the West today, cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, directly speak about understanding the Dalai Lama, understanding what he's bringing in and converting it into a psychological technique and a method, right? So these, and all of these texts, if you go to to Dalai Lama's work, he will refer back to the Yoga Sutra
Okay.
and the yoga texts, right? So there's actually, except for people who fight today about Buddhism and Hinduism, there's not much of a difference between the two,
Hmm.
except some basic philosophical questions. Much of the practices are all the same. Much of the understanding of the mind is very much the same. So I would not look at them as two separate
Hmm.
things. They're just
But
two
but the
forms.
Yoga Sutra Raghu does not have anything to do with Buddhism or Hinduism.
Some of the basic tenets of the Yoga Sutra are quoted directly by the Buddha. They're quoted by several people, several wisdom teachers,
Okay.
right? But it's part of the Hindu continuity. But it's been the sutras as they are quoted in Buddhism. They're quoted in other places also.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't think at the earlier times none of this was held exclusively.
Hmm. So this is the science behind it. Now, I know also you hold a lot of workshops for the leadership, and you have a
Yes.
certain style of teaching on those leadership
Yeah.
courses. which is, based on the inside out, based on learning by theater and all of this. So in today's context, Raghu, why would a leader learn how to do yoga?
Why would he not?
Yeah, that's another question. But if I think of
Okay, why would he learn?
yeah,
There are a few very solid reasons for that, Ara. Firstly, there are two very critical questions that any leader has to ask, right? One is, if I don't have a healthy body, from where will my energy, my stamina, and my resilience come from?
okay.
Right? And everybody knows that the most powerful practice for having a healthy body is doing proper yoga. Yeah, not some of the stuff that's going around now, but really understanding yoga the way Krishnamacharya taught us and all of that is a very, very critical tool for keeping the body in shape and very high levels of resilience. And this has been tested enough, right? The second is the entire mindfulness movement that's going around in the West is dhyana. It's taken from the Yoga Sutras. It's taken from the yogic idea. So if you cannot have a calm mind, how do you think?
All over, like a monkey jumping
So if you
on
have to,
trees.
So if you have to have a resilient body and if you have to have a calm mind, you have to learn and understand yoga, right? And then yoga also tells you how to look at your mind and understand how it works, right? How do you understand power? And it's extremely important for a leader to understand power.
Oh no!
So when you go to the Mahabharata, it teaches you about the 5 brothers and the 5 kinds of power that they have to exercise at different points of time. So understanding power and the wisdom of understanding power. Can I use power in a way that is meaningful, that is sustaining of the world and so on, comes from here. And all this is inside out. This has to be developed and nourished within the person. You were asking something?
Yeah, so the power is really important to know the, when to use it and how to use it and where to use it.
Correct.
But I think as leaders, Raghu, as leaders, we kind of tend to forget this power thing. And there are many, many aspects to the leadership other than the power. So that reminds me, like when I was reading The Art of War, when I was reading, Robert de Greene about war and about the power, it has a lot said about the power. But why would I want to go and study and practice yoga to understand about power?
No, if you read Lao Tzu, if you read Sun Tzu,
yes,
right, the types of power he talks about are reflected in the Mahabharata. Right? If you remember, the final power he talks about is the ability to sit and wait and not act. Yeah, which is the power of just being and waiting and listening so carefully that you have to do very little to win a war and maybe not even fight it, right? If you look at some of the other stuff in the samurai literature, there are 5 kinds of stands that they talk about. One is the stand of earth, stand of water, fire, air, and space. These are the 5 Pandavas. Each Pandava represents each one of these powers. Right? So the Mahabharata is a translation, of the depth of understanding of the human being, what constitutes a human being, and where you can draw power from. So the power of earth is to create solidity, it's to create security and structure, right? So one of the brothers, Yudhishthira, represents the power of order and structure, right? Water is full of emotion, right? It's a whole different kind of power, right? It offers love, it offers caring, right? Wind is another kind of power. So each of the brothers is actually a reflection of a different kind of power. And all of these, the reason why I talked about samurai and all that is they all draw from the same ground, from the same philosophical ground.
Yeah.
They're drawing from that. Yeah.
So I know, Raghu, you're so immersed with the Mahabharata and immersion and all that. But let's say I'm a leader from different part of India. I don't know Mahabharata. I don't know the five Pandavas. I don't know Yudhishthira. Just a leader today.
Yes.
I want to learn how to lead better, how to lead my people better. And
Yeah.
especially in time like this, Raghu, like,
Of course.
we have faced with a situation where we all got tested on our
Correct.
leadership skill and our leadership style. And
Correct.
I would like to know from you as a leader today, what do I need to do to become a better leader in time of uncertainty?
It's back to what I was telling you about, Arif. See, you don't have to know Yudhishthira, you don't have to know any of these people, right? But the essence of these 5 types of power are as relevant today as any point of time. So I'm just calling them 5 seats of power or 5 seats of wisdom.
Yeah.
That's it, right? And the fact that I'm drawing the lessons from here is not important unless you would like to know about it, right? So there are 2 parts to any leadership. One is the skill that you need to understand. You have to have knowledge. You have to know how to draw up a strategy and all of that. The other part is what I'm calling the will. Right now, if you go into any organization, yeah, most people have a fairly high degree of understanding of what to do. What do they need a leader for? They need a leader to be able to hold himself in awareness and balance and calmness with a sense of direction in times which are very difficult. He has to give that pivotal point. He has to give that still point where he can absorb people's tension, he can absorb people's fears, look carefully and give the right direction. And if something goes wrong, he's willing to stand up there and be accountable. Right? These are all internal strengths. This is the strength of the will. Yeah, you can always buy skill. You cannot buy will. And when times get more and more difficult, you need will is what is questioned. Right? And the real higher purpose from which you act. Right? I'm very certain that in the COVID time, only those businesses that are actually giving great value to people will survive. Because people will not have the time or the money to pay for anything that is not going to be really useful, right? They had a very interesting measure for the resilience of businesses called the lipstick something, the lipstick quotient or some such thing. They find it's not working.
Interesting.
Because lipstick is, yeah. So all of these things that are being made today, which are not essential, which are not going to sustain human life, will have a difficulty. So businesses that are anchored in deep purpose, anchored in human values and so on, I think are the ones that will survive. Because I was just talking to a vice president of a company in America a few days back in a coaching session. He was talking about the extent of anxiety and fear in the people in his team, right? And he's come to me because he's studying yoga and he wanted to discover a lot more about the yoga of how to work with this. So I talked to him about the 5 kinds of power and so on. And he realized how much the power of service is underrated in organizations today.
And what do you mean about the power of service?
This is what is generally called servant leadership, things like that. No? And that is one of the 5 Pandavas, one of the 5 brothers represents the power of service, where you put others before you. and you create infrastructures. You make sure that people feel well. You're a healer. So this power of healing is becoming very, very critical today, right? And where organizations which can bring this power, leaders who can show this power, are then able to create the kind of mindsets which are enabling of action. This is what I was telling you right in the beginning. When I went into a turnaround situation, what was I doing? I was just bringing this healing mindset into the picture.
I like that servant and healing mindset, especially in today's context. So, Raghu, what has changed in the leadership between before COVID and after COVID?
See, I think I'm hoping. I don't know if it will. Nobody knows what's going to happen after COVID. What is COVID has thrown up the difference between businesses that are really sustaining us, sustaining the environment, sustaining human beings, all simultaneously, yeah, and organizations that don't do this, right? It's showing up what happens when there's huge income disparity, right? It is showing up a lot of the hollowness in governance processes that don't focus on the fundamentals of what is human. So it's my hope that as we go forward, this lesson will be internalized, right? And there'll be a lot more investment in these fundamentals rather than in so much of wasteful production that happened. The earth cannot sustain wasteful production.
Right.
That should be more than obvious to anybody. Yeah. People have been speaking about it from the 70s, now the Club of Rome and so many other studies that have been going on. And I think what we're facing now is the consequences that they spoke about. Yeah.
So this CEO
that's my
that
hope.
has, yeah, that's what we all hope. This CEO that had talked to you from America about, his people have more anxiety, more fear, and how can he help them through yoga? This person is already introduced to yoga. What would you tell people who are not introduced to yoga, and how could it help them? How could we convince them that yoga is a major important part of life rather than, for everybody, rather than to leadership?
See, Arif, when I go and talk to people, I don't go to them saying, look, I've got yoga and I've got to sell yoga to you, right? People who come to me, and I've worked with organizations for a long time, yeah, sometimes for almost a decade, where I work with the leadership, I do some training work, I do some coaching work, and I do culture building. I help them across the board. I don't go in there with anything except to listen to what they have to say.
Okay.
Right. And I am using all the yogic training that I have got to be able to listen to them very, very carefully. So when I'm listening to them carefully, often what happens, and I think, it's just because I'm listening carefully, people often talk to me about their fears, their anxieties, and many other issues that they're going through, right? And then I'm helping them to work through these things, right? Now, if they ask me, then I say, by the way, yoga will help you in this way.
Okay.
But I'm not putting yoga up front. I'm putting my capabilities to listen, my capabilities to think, my capabilities to absorb this person's anxieties, to listen to their deepest fears, and so on. Because, the higher you go, it's not a cliche to say that you become more lonely. You're more accountable. And if you're a serious person, every decision you take is impacting not just people in your organization, but people all around. I remember one of the early turnarounds I did. There was the general manager of a factory, and he had a very strict way of going about things and so on. So we just asked him to draw a picture of saying, how many people does a decision of yours affect?
Okay.
So he drew this picture, and then he talked about a few people who were, uh, reporting to him, and some people in the organization. And then the rest of his team sat together, and they started expanding on the picture.
Okay.
And his was the critical factory in that district in India, small district in Tamil Nadu. So his decisions were impacting more than 1 million people.
Wow.
Yeah, because depending on how well this factory did, right, the people who were in school, the people who were supplying things, the entire agricultural background, and therefore the circulation of money, small shops, the entire thing. He just broke down and he said, I never realized this.
Mm.
And he came back to the workshop the next morning with a beautiful poem
Oh, okay.
written in his native language, in Tamil, that talked about how blind he had been.
Wow, what a
Right?
vulnerability.
And recovering, yes, and recovering his own sense of humanness, his own sense of meaning and purpose, which was much, much larger than what he thought was his role in the organization.
But that would be really nice if every leader in today's context and life that we see in the world, that would come the next day with a poem, isn't it?
Yes, it would. It would. Yes.
But what is that thing that made him shift, tipping point, to show his vulnerability and to realize and see?
It was a 3-4 day workshop, and we had created a context with a lot of trust between people and so on. So when he put up his picture saying, this is my role, right, there was enough trust to let other people also start adding to it and saying, hey, you're impacting this, you're impacting this, you're impacting this.
Okay.
And soon the whole team started getting excited because they saw that what they were doing was not just confined to the factory. Right? I've done this with other leaders, and it's quite amazing when they realize how important their job is. And it's a gift that they're in this position from which they can influence and help thousands of people. Right? And most people are compassionate inside.
Yeah.
It's a strange idea that a manager has to be tough and whatever, which I think is a complete facade. They're human beings, and many of them are extremely compassionate also. They might be tough, they might be whatever. So when this human compassion is touched and they realize how much they can actually influence people, their whole idea of their role changes. They actually understand what the word purpose means and the meaning of life is all about. And they shift. It's not as though they're going to become less tough or less strategic.
Right.
But the meaning in which they're anchoring all this changes completely. And that is yoga.
Yeah.
Yoga is simply discovering the center of my being, the source of my energy, the source of my meaning. That is yoga. To be united back with these fundamental things within me is yoga.
I like that.
It happens to need good health. It happens to need good breathing.
Yeah.
It happens to need a calm mind to be able to discover this.
I like that, Raghu, and I think this is a good wrap up to our meaningful conversation. And if there is anything you wanted to say, because there is a question, I want to leave it till last. But is there anything you want to add to this regarding leadership and importance of yoga and anything?
Yeah, there's one thing which I think I have stated, but might require emphasis. The fact is that throughout history, if you look at history, there have been 3 kinds of forces at play in human beings. One is conflict, the other is cooperation, and the third is collusion. Yeah, collusion is when wise people don't speak up.
Yeah.
They're willing to go along with things, right?
Yeah, I know Sahadeva very well.
Right? So when you have these three, I think it is very obvious to any serious viewer of human civilization that cooperation and love and respect takes people much, much further than conflict, because conflict ends up in toxic nationalism, in toxic religion, in war, and so on.
Yeah.
And I don't think human beings can afford to put 15, 20, 30% of their GDP in creating weapons of war and creating tensions around the world and figuring out how I'm better than you and so on. It's such a waste of time.
Yeah.
And the more they internalize the fundamental principles of yoga, which are universal, the more you anchor back in compassion and love.
So what are these three things again?
There's conflict,
there's
cooperation, and there's collusion.
Collusion, yeah.
Right?
Beautiful.
So we have to tilt the balance towards cooperation and not to conflict. Right? And every time you push toxic nationalism, every time you push, religious upmanship, you push all these divisions. See, human beings are different. Now, you're different from me. Right? There's nothing we can do about it. You know a different language, I know a different language, so on and so forth. If I learn to respect you and respect the difference, then there's collaboration. I learn from you, you learn from me. And it's great that we know different things, then we can learn.
Absolutely.
But if the moment I see difference, I get onto my high horse and say, I got to beat the crap out of you or something like that. Yeah, that somehow, if you're different from me, I have to continuously prove to you how I'm better than you. What a waste of time. What a waste of energy. Yeah, all war is just this.
Absolutely. So that's about conflict and about collaboration,
cooperation,
about collision.
And I think we just need to learn this lesson and go forward with collaboration, with mutual respect. It's a simple thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it sounds simple, but I think to act on it, that's what we see in around the world.
That's right.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we've been investing in conflict for far too long.
Right.
Therefore, a simple thing like collaboration becomes very difficult.
And we forgot about how beautiful collaboration is.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And only through love we can bring that. Raghu, I'm going to ask you the last question is, you said three people being impacting your life and they have impact on the way you are today. And one of them is J. Krishnamurti, because I'm a fan of that person and he's a thought leader. If he is here today, as a word of gratitude, what would you tell him?
I would sit with him silently.
Wow. Beautiful. Beautiful.
I would just sit with him in silence.
Beautiful, Raghu. Thank you so much for being part of a meaningful conversation. And thank you for your time and wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.